let's say you have a fantastic 100 gig hard drive and all of these people want to store their data. But when somebody who is accessing their information, they don't want access to somebody else's folder, they don't want that. So what is really happening is, one is you have to have the fine-grained control at the data level, data layer. Now what is happening is you're providing all of a sudden a service which was a narrow service where you were providing a narrow pipe. You're saying, if I'm providing him the information, then I'm not only having the data, but also the server connection, the VPN connection, or the pipe, everything is dedicated to him. Now what you're doing is, everybody, all of you guys can access me from the cloud. I'm actually doing what I call as throwing out data there, which you can actually access, or based on the information that you are subscribing to, it will come to you. So that is the difference. So now all of a sudden what really happens is, you still may have very fine-grained control on your data which resides finally, but you may not have access, control over that environment where you're starting to supply the information. So that is where the difference is in terms of the virtualization.
Okay.
Yeah?
Just to add to your point, I think, I mean, if you look at the current scenario, I mean, in case if we just forget the cloud for a moment, when today, when we buy a domain from outside, there also, I think we are typically we are living in the same world. We have the same, we have a databases, we have got web servers, application servers getting shared across the various service consumers, right? What I think, as is also rightly pointed out, we have just added another layer of abstraction, what we calling the abstraction here, which is basically adding new set of servers or new set of infrastructure, which is hiding the internal servers and then providing the access to the external world, where that security has been added, whereas we do have the internal security already existing, but then we have added another layer of security from the perspective that, okay, in case if I'm coming and accessing your information, that I'm fully aware that where your data is stored, how that would be accessed, though that is stored in the same shared environment, but now it's much more controlled than what it was before.
Right. I think apply it to the same fundamental principle that I talked to you in terms of your apartment building, right? Take the same real life concept and apply it to this. If you had your own apartment where you had your key, you had a protection, you had all of that, you have your TV, you have your safe, you have all of that, because you're securely locking it and other things, you have control, right? That's because you have control over that particular piece of it, because you know that nobody. Now, look at all the other common areas. Anybody can access it, everybody. So all of those are being provided as common services. So the provider needs to provide you additional layers where he can then give you the assurance that those common areas are also secure. That is what it is. So now if you take the same fundamental principle and apply it to all of those particular areas other than your data which is getting abstracted, then you have to really have that additional levels of protection. It is not that it is out there and anybody can access another thing, but they need to provide you the assurance that when you are accessing that information, only you can access that information. It is who has access to what, when, why. The same fundamental principles applies whether it was in a data center which was on the ground or whether it's in the cloud. I'm going to skip this. We'll just very quickly move to some of the other elements which are of importance. Data governance, as I said, extremely important. Who owns the data, how it is to be used, are controls in place. And with the IT Act and the privacy laws and all things, and if you are providers which are the thing, it's significant that it's not only you address who owns the data, you need to know where is this data residing. Do you have tight control over that particular data? With the abstraction that the cloud is talking about and the provider saying that he wants to really build synergies, and this is what it is, right? The reason that the provider wants to do, the provider is not doing it just from a competitive perspective. The provider is doing it because he can do significant cost reduction on his own enterprise infrastructure. With that, he is introducing significant amount of element of risk. For example, you manage operations today. Ask your provider, are you actually providing all of my services dedicated to me, or are you providing it as a cloud? Even your existing operation, the provider has to have full disclosure on that, because I think that is extremely significant, because if he is providing it to you in a cloud, then he needs to have additional checks and balances. Security and privacy. How is security achieved? From, as I said, from the point of access to the point where the data is stored, in terms of all the three principles of security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are key that he needs to really manage. Audit and assurance. Are there risk management controls to applications and data? You may have a common application which is accessible not only to you, but it's also accessible to your competitor. It's accessible to everybody. What is the data governance, and what is the risk management and control that he is putting in this? Tax and legal requirement. All of a sudden, your data today, if it is not residing in India, if you're accessing this particular data from some other location, while you may think it is only a data governance or privacy or that kind of issue, there are also significant tax and legal penalties that can be levied on an organization based on where the data is actually residing and where you're actually accessing the information. And you have to be while there's a shade of gray on the entire virtualized environment, ultimately for an organization which has built its customer, which has built information, the cloud environment and the data residing is still your data. It's still your environment. So you need to be able to say that irrespective of whether I am operating with service provider X or I'm operating with service provider Y, when I want to pull out, I would be able to clearly define what is mine and what are the providers. Otherwise, when the commingling and other things starts, is where you're talking about shades of gray. Backup and DR. How are they really providing backup and DR? Vendor lock-in. Is the vendor limiting operability or access to your data? And this again happens. As there's more abstraction, as there's information, even though you may have audit rights, for the vendor to extract all of that information on a timely basis and provide it to you may be a challenge, depending on how he's actually, yeah. Right. IT operations. What IT services and applications are best suited for the cloud? IT readiness. Are your internal architectures and organization structures ready? Do you have the right capability internally to manage it? Do you have the people who understand virtualization? Do you have the people who understand security and provide privacy in a virtualized environment? Do you have the right people who can essentially establish these infrastructures, and if it actually goes down, to actually manage it? So you need to be considering each one of these elements, not only from a risk perspective, but also from an operational perspective. Today, adoption in India, the challenges. Significant challenge that we have seen, we've actually helped organizations float out RFPs. We have interacted with significant number of service providers. We have done, I would say, globally, we have done around close to around 60 implementations of cloud for very large organizations, and in the medium segment, we have done significantly more. Lack of clarity in the model. What is it that they're taking in the cloud? What still exists in your existing environment? That lack of clarity. Migration issues. For them to essentially move it from their existing environment into the cloud, they're not very clear. They're a lot of times very silent on how are they really going to manage that. Legal and contractual issues. If they are providing it to your service, what is it that you absorb as a liability, and what is the liability of the provider or in this particular cases? Previously it was your infrastructure. So look at it this way. The key thing is you can outsource an environment, but you cannot outsource your risk. So you really need to look at it and manage to see what is the provider providing to you in terms of protection clauses for your internal matters. Compliance issues. Again, the security and privacy frameworks that I've seen, the areas that I've seen in terms of IT governance, IT risk management in cloud environments from the provider is still very weak, because just like all of you, they're also grappling with the challenges of security and privacy, and where they are really experimenting and where they are really learning out of everything is from the mid-market segment today, because the mid-market segment is really open to taking on risk, and it is because of the nature of their environment. It is nothing wrong. It's just that if they don't do that, they will be non-existent, so they're willing to take the risk, and business is risk today. Data security and privacy, this is the biggest issue. If you notice, this is a findings survey that was conducted, and this is the kind of finding that you have, where you have critical, very important, less important, not important, and 70% of the people really look at security and privacy as a very critical aspect, which is the right area to be focused on. Cloud computing planning and risk assessment. Most of you, as you look at, are in an environment or in a business segment which is regulated. There are specific regulations that really apply to you. For example, if you are an SEC registrant, then your SOX requirements and your HIPAA requirements, all of that are significant. And there are now starting evolution of standards on that too, in terms of how it actually applies to a cloud environment. Then how many of you are familiar with CSA, Cloud Security Alliance? Okay. If you have not seen it before, I would encourage you. Deloitte is also one of members of Cloud Security Alliance. We are doing a lot of work. There's a lot of literature, a lot of material in terms of audits, process, procedures, and if you interact with us in that particular forum, Cloud Security Alliance is I would say, voluntary global body which is promoting, and their objective is to provide assurance and security in the cloud environment. And organizations like Deloitte are contributing towards thought leadership, and we're providing a lot of information. So I would encourage you to go to CSA and look at it.
What are the insurance issues? For instance, are there different insurance strategies?
Insurance strategy, again, it goes back to the factor, if I take your standard contractual clauses and break it down, you have liability, you have indemnity, you have all the other protection clauses that you have in every contract. The question that really happens is, what is the provider willing to take as a risk as he takes your information? So I think from an insurance perspective, significant for you, where you really need to your insurance is not so much from having insurance, but it's more about how do you manage all these liability and other risks which could occur from a third party providing you the service, and how do you manage it to your end client. And to that extent, some of these providers are also providing what they call as insurance packages, to say that if I have this kind of a break-in and other thing, this is the kind of insurance that I will actually provide. It's more of protection, additional level of protection that they are trying to guarantee, and they are in turn trying to sort of mitigate themselves in those particular areas, and that's the kind of insurance package that they are doing.
Usually, actually, what happens is start of every 2 years or something, we have, they ask IT, okay, what is the blanket insurance? The finance guys come and ask, what is the total insurance you want to put under blanket insurance? Is it going to change because of you're moving away a lot of IT assets, you're moving away a lot of things? So how does it change?
It will not go down. I would say it would go up. The reason it would go up is this. Even if you're going into virtualized environment, while you may not be owning the assets, you're still owning the service that is being provided.
But should you carry it, or
it's how you contractually manage it, whether the provider carries it or you carry it. Ultimately, are you owning the assets which the provider, where he's building your virtualized environment, or is he putting his own environment? There are a lot of things, whether it's leased equipment, is it a build, operate and transfer kind of a model? Is it completely saying that for 5 years you just have a subscription for him and after that you're free to move? A lot of things, because then who owns the assets and how they are really applying it is going to be significant.
I'm not sure whether the insurance guy will do the sort of compensation, or if the insurance fellow is going to do it, he must be allowed access to audit and see about the safety of the thing.
He is, you know all how insurance people work, right?
Yeah.
Even if they want to give you a life insurance, they'll tell you to go through all the battery of tests and other things. So same way, insurance providers have been reaching out to us and saying that this person wants to take up an insurance policy. So what is it that we need to do, right? They will do all the same things. Previously it was doctors who are doing it, now it is the consultants who are doing it and providing that security, and that is what is happening. I totally agree with you. Insurance is not, they also are mitigating their particular risk, but again it is not that level of an insecure environment. It is more of how you abstract it and how you slice it down and tie it down, because once you tie it down to the fine grained SLAs, service levels, and take those service levels and apply the right level of penalties to say that I am expecting to provide my customer 99.7, service provider needs to provide me 99.9. If he fails on 99.9, then I manage it with SLAs and contractual liabilities and all things. That's what you need to do. And that applies even today to your traditional hardware that you would outsource.
Yeah, but at least it resides here. I can take the insurance directly. I have an insurable interest.
But it's going to be very difficult for you to get,
Yeah.
like, while the
virtual-
providers are trying to jump into the bandwagon of insurance, but I think it is still very gray area for them, so you will not get a blanket insurance.
Just one question. Is there any service provider or insurance service provider offering this kind of insurance as of now? Because as far as we can also talk to some of them, there is much more product available in the market. Except for like hardware and other things which are in assets, you can get it.
Okay, I can talk to you offline on that, because what we are working with a couple of providers is in confidence in terms of a portfolio. They're offering it right now selectively to some of their premium customers. That is what they're doing right now, but I don't know if I'm at a liberty to disclose that, but I'm more than happy to ask them and get you introduced, and then they can talk to you about this one, because I'm not in the business of selling the insurance. I'm more of providing them additional assurance in that particular area.
How popular this is now in India?
Which one?
This whole cloud.
I would say mid-market significant from a public cloud. Okay, and then there are companies which are sort of in the 2,000 to 5,000 crore kind of range. We are seeing a lot of adoption. They are doing that. Across board, if I look at established companies, most of them are doing private cloud. Okay, because it's waiting and watching, but in the US, I would, if you take US, UK and other things which are already on the leading edge, I would say significant adoption on that. Impact to regulatory, impact to data privacy, impact to organization security posture, strategy for cloud computing migration, evaluate vendor capabilities mapped to requirements with financial benefits, assessment of cloud computing provider security capabilities, control and monitoring. And I think a good point for you to really look at when you're evaluating, you have to say, if I were to take this in a non-cloud environment, what would you provide? If I were to take it in the cloud environment, what would you provide and what would change? Ask them to, whenever you're talking to a provider or anybody internal, just ask them to give you that comparison. That will automatically help you spot out those particular areas which are gray areas and start enhancing your audit program specific to that.
Coming to this point, at a very basic level, as a layman area, if I trying to go to my CEO and asking them, boss, this is the cloud things and this is the major three advantages in compared to the traditional way of doing the things.
Right.
In your opinion, what could be that three major advantages you can talk about, which is not really available there, and it can make a balance for the cost which is going to incur for this?
I already addressed it in my first few slides. Cost reduction, CAPEX to OPEX, right?
CAPEX to OPEX is not exactly the benefit, you know.
It is a benefit.
CAPEX you are introducing now, it depends.
I feel that it's not converting my CAPEX to my OPEX, it's more like converting the provider's CAPEX to my OPEX.
No, it's how you structure your contract. You can structure cash flow contracts with the provider.
No, I know, I understand.
You don't have to make a big investment.
Right.
But if
Like,
you pay it as you earn.
I'm doing solutions right now for organizations which are running into thousands of crores, where we are telling the provider, client is not going to pay you day one, he is not going to pay you all those 1,000 crores. He is going to pay you based on the usage of their equipment over the annuity of that contract. There are certain things which are upfront, they have to invest, which is the baseline, which is the investment of infrastructure, because there are some things which don't change over the 5 to 10-year period. But there are other things, for example, if you're looking at capacity, if you're looking at utilization, all of that, my business is going to grow. Why should I really pay upfront the entire money? It is outsourced, and you can structure it as an cash flow contract. In a normal environment and in a cloud environment, it is that much more. And that is one of the biggest advantages. If the subscriber is not giving you a subscription model where he's converting your CAPEX to OPEX, then yeah.
I'm just trying to.
And are they providing you that kind of a benefit? Yeah. Would be happy to talk to that particular provider for you.
I am trying to say the questions from that perspective, that where money is easily available.
Yes.
Investing, the opportunity cost for that money to be invested on that CAPEX is not that great for an organizations. They have enough amount of the liquidity, no problem for them.
Okay.
They can invest. Security is, of course, is a very big threat for them, and they don't want to compromise anything on the security part of it. Now, for those type of organization, what could be the 3 biggest factors? Forget about the CAPEX part of it, money part of it. Security is the major concern. What could be the 3 motivating factors to go for them to the cloud?
Is their IT infrastructure sufficient to manage all of their operations, or is it that is also you have enough capacity?
Yes, capacity is there, money is there. Opportunity cost for that money is almost 0. No problem for that. Then what? Then
I would say, why are you considering the cloud? You have a stable operation, you have cash flow to invest. Why are you considering?
That is the things I am trying to show you. Other than the cost factor, is there any other motivating factors?
What is your business segment you're operating in?
In oil and gas. Is oil and gas.
Oil and gas.
Yes.
Oil and gas, again, you don't have any retail. Do you have retail operation?
It's not exactly retail. It is a oil exploration.
You're in the upstream or downstream?
Upstream, downstream, both.
Okay, both.
It's a government.
Government, right. Yes. In that particular case, I would not encourage, I would say, if I were to come and evaluate your environment and say, and if this is what was the situation, you had enough cash flow to invest in your IT hardware and you had this one, I would not encourage you to go, you do not have a business case to go into this.
So you mean to say this all about the cost benefits, and only the part of the cost is the factor?
It is about cost benefits, it's about scalability of your platform, accessibility of your platform. For example, if you take banking today and you look at retail banking, where do the banks really make most of their money? In the rural sectors and others. They want to really start providing a lot more of the services there. While the provider and all, they don't want to have captive branches or infrastructure in each one of those locations. In those particular cases, they could provide those particular services. Same thing if you take a telecom operator, any segment, and again, it is your business model, business operation. I am telling you right now, you do not have a business case based on the facts that you shared with me. Would be happy to talk to you offline and understand your entire business model. There may be areas where you could have and virtualize, but I don't want to comment on it without info. Go ahead.
Recently, if you see the latest attacks, Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company, the entire, almost 30,000 PCs was brought down. Okay, all the main servers, they didn't work for a week. Their whole email service was affected.
Okay.
Cloud, could it have stopped it? If they were in a cloud environment, they could have.
Why would? Why?
Yeah.
Why? No, why? Yeah. You cannot equate. Okay, take the recent attacks on the entire, not attacks, let's say the power went out.
Yeah.
How many of you thought that it could have been attacked? Right? All of our power grids today are virtualized networks, and there are SCADA issues, there are Stuxnet issues and other things which apply to these particular networks, right? And in this particular case, even if you were to put it in the cloud, you may have availability of service because it was in some other location, but I don't.
No, but you are comparing a different case. Power usually is a, you have only one service provider.
No.
You have only one provider for power. Other than maybe everybody has a backup at home, But if you're talking about cloud, you should have alternate arrangements.
You could. No, you could have alternate arrangements.
Yeah.
That is the availability and other thing that you're talking about, but that does not apply to the situation he's talking
You
about.
cannot compare with power. Power is.
No, if I were to compare it one-on-one, what you're talking about from an availability perspective does not apply specific to his environment. He could, only thing that I could say is potentially in some of the areas where they need data storage and those kind of things, there could be cloud-based SAN or cloud-based services that could be provided. And as I said, unless I understand their business model and their requirement, I would not be able to comment. Some other question? Yeah.
Hi. Basically, just taking up my point is it could be a feasible option for him to go to cloud in case he want to concentrate only on his core operation. What is your point of view on that? Because I am aware of many companies in India who have amazing cash flow and they are among the richest companies, but they have still outsourced some part of their operations because they want to concentrate on their core area of operation, and anything which will take away their time and energy away from that, that is a business case that could be looked into.
Okay, but that's where I asked them, do you have challenges with the fund spending, IT, infrastructure, security, privacy? I think all of that he said no, right? And I agree with you that it could essentially get you from a focus in terms of core business, and also it could increase your bottom line, right? Because you're all of a sudden saying that let the IT spend for me is, let's say, 30 crores. All of a sudden with cloud provider and other thing or managed, you don't need to go to cloud. You have established managed services operation today. For that, cloud is not the thing. You could do managed services operation which is dedicated to your organization, have all the security and privacy, and still achieve what you're talking about.
Okay. Thank you.
Strategy, again, defining cloud computing architecture, assist with implementation, assist to conduct cloud proof of concept and pilots. Are all of you doing proof of concept in your environment? Again, that is where you identify core, non-core, what is it that you want to outsource, what do you want to do on the cloud. Assist with data governance, personal information, patent or trade secret, customer information, financial information, other sensitive information. If you were to apply the confidentiality policy that you have within your environment, you have to look at it in the same fashion. If somebody in your environment is coming and saying that we are moving into the cloud, you need to start asking about this. Where is this kind of information going to reside? And how are you demonstrating to me that you're going to have a fine-grained control on all of these particular elements? This typically applies to any organization. And in a product kind of a company, you would have R&D, you would have innovation, you had IP. In a services kind of company, you may have information related to your pricing and those kind of, which are very sensitive. And for a services kind of a company, the customer segment is significantly important. So it's a question of how you store that information. Even today, when you're looking at managed services, you may have your help desk being managed by a third-party provider. You are still securing that information whereby even the help desk operator knows your customer and the number and other thing. You're still protecting those. Some of those same principles could apply here. It's just that you need to be aware of, one is how is this information being acquired, how is it being managed, how is it being destroyed in terms of the entire data usage or information usage, and if the information has to be retained, how is it being archived, encrypted and protected. Traditional key IT functions, internally provide managed services. You could still provide you're talking about core and non-core. You could have cloud provided managed resources, which essentially are telling you that right? These could be cloud provided services, these could still be internally provided services, and all the traditional IT function and operations still apply to the area. And this part of it we will talk about how could you further ensure it will. How am I doing on time? Okay. Where does it? Oh, 11. Okay. Okay. Let's come. I'm sure most of you are not interested in tax strategy. We can come back if anybody wants to talk. Okay.